We are told that having lots of data is awesome, aren't we? We live in a world where we have access to so much data to make some great decisions and help us build amazing products. We're told measure everything so that whatever we measure, we'll make sure that we do. We're told if you're going to make a good decision, make that decision with lots of data. And when you're having a conversation, bring data to the conversation and just don't bring an opinion. All this data-driven world we live in is amazing, isn't it? Right? Or maybe not so much. Hey everyone, my name is Sherif Mansour. I'm a product manager at Atlassian, and I've been doing product management for about 11 years now. And in my time, I've been lucky enough to see the industry shift from a world where we shipped products to customers' environments where we had access to no usage data, really. We had a lot more qualitative data, but certainly nowhere near as much quantitative data as we had today. To a world today where teams can't even imagine how they would operate without having access to all this data. And to be frank, this big switch, I think, has caused a lot of our teams to lose a lot of balance in their conversation and decision making. I think the more we swing towards this data-driven approach, there are some common pitfalls that I've seen many teams fall into. So today, I've written this talk with the hope to bring some balance back into the conversation. I don't think it's one extreme of being completely quantitative, at the other extreme of being qualitative. Today, I would like to bring some more of a balanced view to this discussion and hopefully swing that pendulum a little bit more to the middle for a lot of your teams out there. And I hope to do that by sharing examples at Atlassian. I've been lucky enough to work in lots of projects at Atlassian, and seeing this data-driven paradox, if you like, impact a lot of our teams. And I'll do this by sharing 3 areas that I've observed this happen in. What teams do with data and how they use data when they're setting their goals. All the data-informed paradox they live in when they're trying to make a decision and deciding what to build next. Or for many of us, as we ship and we continue to incrementally improve our features, how can we take a more balanced view or a data-informed view rather than a data-driven view to build better products? So let's get started. I'd love to start by talking about a more balanced approach to goal setting and being more data-informed than data-driven. We all love a good goal, don't we? Setting measurable goals is a great thing. And there is a lot of hype right now in the industry about the objectives and key results, or OKRs framework. I'm sure some of you have heard about this. John Doerr has effectively written the Bible of OKRs in this book here. Highly recommended, actually, if you're interested in reading it. And he talks about the importance of setting a key result that is measurable and is very binary in its outcome. He talks about, did you meet the objective and the key result, or did you not? It's a yes or no answer. Sounds great, right? Well, let me give you an example where we were a little bit too over-focused on these numbers at Atlassian, and I think it backfired at us, and we learned a lot through this experience. I'm sure some of you out there are familiar with one of our products, Confluence. If you haven't used it at a really high level, it's a product that helps teams collaborate on content. Teams can create different kinds of content, as you can see in this screenshot here, whether it be a question, a decision, a spec, a requirements page, a blog post, whatever, and they collaborate on it. So for those of you that are aware of the product, thank you for paying for my salary. I really appreciate it. Thank you for looking after me and my family. Keep it up. But in all serious notes, I was working in the Confluence team at the time, and we gave the team an objective, a very clear, measurable key result. We want you to increase the average amount of pages per user. The hypothesis here was pretty simple. The more pages you create in the product, the more value you're probably getting out of it. So that was the key result we wanted them to move. So what did the team come up with? They explored a bunch of solutions, and they landed up on experience that looked something like this. They changed our create button. When you press create, you went straight, and you used to get that template picker that I showed you earlier. Well, here are all the things you can create. They changed it so that they split the button into 2. Pressing the left side of the button here, create, went straight to a blank page. You didn't get the option of, here are all the things you can create in this product. And on the right-hand side, the ... menu, by the way, which my designers tell me is a the fancy code name for these menus are called meatballs menus because they look like meatballs in a sort of sub sandwich. But anyway, so on the right hand side, you press that and you get all the other templates and fancy stuff. That dialogue I showed you earlier. Again, the hypothesis here is that we should just get out of the user's way and go straight to creating content with a blank page rather than showing them all the different kinds of things they can create. Sounds good? Again, the goal here is increase the average number of pages per user. What happened next? So we shipped. And over some time, we were like, this is amazing. We had a very clear key result and we shipped, and the average number of pages per user went up. Celebrate. You know, at Atlassian, when we celebrate, we make t-shirts for everything. So we made t-shirts. We had a party. It was a lot of fun. And then it was not until a few months later, through qualitative research on a completely different project, we started to observe some different things. We had quite a few customers telling us, I'm really having trouble getting started with Confluence or in these particular features, or can your product do this, and can your product do that? It's features that we already had in the product that all of a sudden we had a lot of customers or new customers that were reporting that, do you have this or do you not have this feature? And we were a bit confused about what was going on here. So after that qualitative research on a completely different topic, and we accidentally discovered this, we came back to this data. And then we found that a lot of our template usage was going down. So obviously we kind of expected that. We took away that template dialogue. But is that a good thing or a bad thing? This is something really good to wrestle with the team. And then after looking to the data some more, when you create a piece of content, all those features we have in our editor, whether it be mentioning another user, or creating some advanced layouts or tables, or putting some media and images and some dynamic little apps in your page, whether it be diagrams, etc., all those features started to tank. Usage started to go down significantly. Now, again, is this a good thing or a bad thing? The average number of pages per user has been going up, so we achieved our goal, but these other metrics are going down. How do we deal with this? This is a good thing to wrestle with your team. You see, if I reflect back to the scenario that we have, is that we really gave the team a metric. We were a little bit too data-driven in this example, I would like to say. And I think it took the team in a slightly wrong direction. In hindsight, what we should have given the team is a problem over the metric. We should have encouraged the team to focus more on the problem. So if we did that in that scenario, let's go back to our example and see what would have changed. So what was the problem that this solution they came up with was trying to solve? Well, they're really trying to reduce the friction that was there for creating a page. The problem is, as many of us here know, what good problem statements, thinking about what kinds of user have this problem and what kind of impact this problem has. In this case, this friction that was caused here really is for people who already knew what they wanted to do and for people who already learned the product. So it was really for advanced users. So if we come back here and look at this problem statement, we would come back and go, well, if that's the problem we wanted to solve, forget about the metric for a second. Let's talk about the problem. What are some possible ways we could solve this? And there's a whole bunch of advanced ways we could do this, whether it be through shortcuts, we could adapt the design, we could be smarter depending on how frequently you've used something, we can make it a preference, or whatever it is. Like it doesn't really matter too much. But I think the learning here is that we gave the teams a metric and we're hyper-focused on the metric. And the teams hit that metric, but really what we should have given them is the problem over the metric. Now, when we look at defining success, for us, success was that metric. It was average number of pages per user. The second thing we learned here is that success isn't just looking at the metric in isolation. A lot of our teams are probably good at that today. So you're good at focusing on a metric and you can nail that metric and do an amazing job at it. But what we often forget is that success has to also include the guardrails around that metric. So that's something we've been learning over the years, which is we need to think about what are our product guardrails so that if we're moving one metric positively, we're making sure we're not impacted the other metrics. Now, these guardrails, I think, are the things that a lot of teams that forget a lot about when they're really tunnel focused on a specific metric. And these guardrails are really a reflection of your product's true North Star or your direction, right? The reason we're able to establish these guardrails in hindsight was that we realized there was a problem in aligning the team on what the North Star of the product was. For Confluence, we wanted people to create and collaborate on all sorts of content. We didn't want Confluence to be a quick personal note-taking tool. In that case, then encouraging users to go straight to a blank page may be okay in some scenarios, but it's certainly not okay in all scenarios. So we had to understand what are the signals that show us that we're heading towards that North Star vision that we had, and set those things as guardrail metrics for everyone. So I hope you're following along here, but when we think about being data-driven in terms of goal setting, we really need to take a more data-informed approach. And some of the lessons I learned throughout this experience is that ways we can do this is encourage teams really to focus on the problems than the actual metrics. I really think there's a priority sequencing here that our industry needs to shift in terms of our mindset into what we focus on. And when we do focus on those metrics as a secondary thing after the problem, then making sure we're aligned on guardrails is super critical here to ensure that that is a part of the definition of success, not just increasing engagement, improving the average pages per user, but you should see no negative impact to those guardrail metrics. Or if you do, they should be very deliberate. How do you define those guardrail metrics? Well, it really goes back to an alignment problem, really. If your team isn't aligned on the North Star of the product, then they'll go far too data-driven than rather being data-informed. So I hope there's a few tips there when you think about bringing this balance to the conversation when it comes to setting goals. What about the next area that a lot of our teams are involved in? A lot of you are probably involved in this stage, which is deciding on what to build next, right? It's a typical road mapping kind of work. We love using data for this today, right? Now, I don't know about you, but the amount of times I have been in this situation, I feel like I could, if I had $1 for every time I'd be in this situation, or a Bitcoin, I'd be in a very different place. But if only we had data to make this decision, right? How many times have you heard your team say that? How many times have you said that? Now, I don't think this is a bad thing, but again, I want to share with you an example here where we couldn't decide what to do next because of this situation. But in hindsight, it wasn't really impacting our decision in what to do next. Again, this paradox of being too data-driven when we actually didn't need to be. So let me tell you another story of some mistakes we made at Atlassian. So a few years ago, maybe some of our customers who are on the call today will recognize the navigation pattern here in one of our products, Jira. Firstly, thank you for being our customers again. I'll take your Jira feedback later. You can just message them to me on the side or something there. But this is what our navigation system looked like in our product Jira here, right? So it's that horizontal blue bar at the top. Now, we received a lot of feedback from customers over our years that Jira is quite sophisticated, and how do we progressively disclose the advanced features over time without overwhelming everyone? So through a sequence of events and that kind of thing, the design we came up with was something like this. The bar that you have up the top there was moved to a vertical bar, so it's from horizontal to vertical, and we've collapsed a lot of the menu items and hidden them away, if you like. So if you wanted to change context, so let's say you wanted to move from your dashboard to your project, you had to click the this button up here, the Jira logo up the top left here, which already is an interesting thing there. A lot of our customers didn't know what that was, but that's another lesson learned, that one. So they click that button here, and then they would see all the menu items there available to them. Now, the problem that we had in this scenario is that we changed the UI, and again, through qualitative research, we started to receive feedback that there was some stuff that we had that, they were like, do you have this? And we're like, oh yeah, it's here. You've got to sort of navigate back to your home and then switch your context. It was sort of like this, if you like, a hub and spoke model. You always had to go to the hub to switch contexts. Turns out, because Jira is a fairly old product, it's probably close to 20 years now. And as many of you know out there, software does not age very well. That we didn't have analytics for some of the events to understand how this had changed. So we'd call them, in Atlassian, we didn't have the events instrumented, if you like, or we didn't have just data on that information. So what typically happens in this scenario, we're in this scenario, we're receiving some feedback where we think something's wrong, but we don't have enough data to make the decision. Let's come back to what I think teams do here, and I've done myself. You need to make a decision, step one. You realize that particular feature that you want to make a decision on isn't instrumented. So as in, it doesn't have any analytics on it or any data. So what do you do as a PM or a person on the product team? You schedule some time in the product's roadmap backlog to instrument it and get the events in and all that kind of stuff. Usually there's a wait period as well for the data to come in because you want some statistically significant data, and then you can make a decision. You think the formula is pretty simple, right? But I don't know if it is. This is what I think ends up happening. I usually get to step 5, or the teams I've worked in usually get to step 5, and they just have more questions. So Bernice Eng, who has an amazing talk where she talks about the importance of qualitative research and trying to bring this balance here. She talks about the importance of valuing questions over petabytes of data. The quality of your question is first and foremost more important before you get to mining the volume of data. Because what you end up doing is you end up having more questions if you haven't solved that first problem first. So let's come back to our example here. You need to make a decision. You realize there's no data. You put it in the backlog. You wait, and that all of a sudden you can make the decision, right? Well, I think this is where I think we've tried to change some of our team's behavior. So step 3, where you're like, oh, we don't need to make a decision. We don't have any data. Let's put some stuff in the backlog. This is what I encourage teams to start doing now: is literally fake the results first. Imagine you're in a room today, or a virtual room. You have a spreadsheet of all the results that you expect. It's usually a table or a chart of some type. So draw the possible options. It turns out for most things you're trying to ask the question for, there's probably 3 options. The set of numbers you're after was higher than you expected. The set of numbers you're after was sort of indifferent or in the middle, and the set of numbers you're after was lower. Like usually they end up in one of those 3 buckets. So play the movie forward, fake the results. And then as a team, have a discussion about, well, if these numbers came up higher, what would we do next? Would we really change the navigation as a result of this? Would we really do this? And then when you have that discussion, you realize you can fast forward those questions that you need to get to earlier. And maybe you realize you're actually instrumenting the wrong thing, or you're getting analytics for the wrong thing. There's something else you should be getting analytics for, or maybe it wouldn't have changed a decision in the first place. So fake it till you make it. Literally draw a table of the SQL results or a table of the data. And there's only 3 possible scenarios. It's so too close to make a call. It's high or it's low. And you're probably going to end up with more questions. And then spend that time talking about those questions. So I think that certainly helped us a lot. So focus on the questions and discuss how you can help answer them. Then go back and work out, do you actually need data to do this? Or could you make a decision another way? So that's the first scenario. I feel like I've needed more data. The second scenario where I think teams feel like they need more data as well is when it comes to deciding what to build next. The classic road mapping problem. We love a good objective roadmap, right? We don't want any subjective roadmaps in any of our products, right? So there's a lot of these amazing frameworks out there. I'm not going to go into them in a lot of detail, but the general gist of these prioritization frameworks and helping you and your teams decide what to build next goes something like this. In a table, put all the stuff you want to build on the left, and then come up with some criteria on the right. So, in this example, I've got reach, impact, confidence, effort. The more columns you stack on the right, the more sophisticated your formula is, and the more objective and data-driven you look. So, pro tip there, right? So keep loading up the data as much as you want, and then calculate the total scores, and ta-da, like it's a no-brainer. You've now decided what to build next. It's a pretty simple data-driven way to road mapping, right? If you want to be smarter, try and apply a weighting or a scale score to each one of those columns, because maybe not all columns are equal values, so you can even look even more sophisticated. And you know what? If you want to look great in front of management, what do management love? 2x2s. Whack it in a 2x2 chart. Oh, sorry, there's your magical prioritization score, obviously. Again, more sophisticated the columns, and scaling multipliers make your prioritization look more objective. Then stick it in a 2x2 chart for management. And this is a no-brainer. So, you show this to management, you go, hey, we've quantified the value and the effort of each one of these features or these problems we want to solve. And therefore, we should do whatever's in the top right hand corner, bottom left-hand corner, throw it out in the bin. And no one ever knows what to do with the other 2 quadrants, but let's just pretend we do know what to do, right? I hope you're seeing I'm taking a bit of a cynical view to some of these frameworks. Now, I am not saying those frameworks are bad in any way. I just think, like many things in product management, we have got a hammer and we're trying to do everything with a hammer. And these frameworks are really good in some scenarios, but I found that a majority of the scenarios, we're trying to do a one-size-fits-all for a lot of our teams and think that this is the most data-driven way. So I actually think there's a few different ways you can plan a roadmap, not just this particular put numbers in a spreadsheet, come up with a prioritization score way. And I wanted to share with you a few examples where you might take a more qualitative-led approach rather than a data-driven approach to road mapping. And again, it might be because of different scenarios. So the first scenario here is persona-led road mapping. Now, this, by the way, is not a comprehensive talk on different ways to roadmaps. There's another talk I've done on that, which you may be interested in, but I just want to give you some examples here. So you want to take a persona-led road mapping approach when your team is trying to address some issues for a particular user of your product. So personas are archetypes or a summary of the different kinds of users that use your product. Most of you out there are probably working on products with more than one kind of user, not a single user, but maybe some of you are working on more consumer-facing apps or that kind of thing. But you want to focus on a particular persona. And these personas are created through lots of qualitative research. You interview your customers, you learn about them, then you create names for them, and these names help your team build a shared language and a shared brain for who you're building for and what feature is for which kind of user. And this is some examples of some older personas that we have had at Atlassian, had Alana and Emma and William. But when I talk to my team and say, oh, this is for an Alana or an Emma or whoever it is, we have built a shared brain for what that means. It may mean that person thinks this way or has these goals and objectives, or they use more likely to use these kinds of features. And we've built that through the knowledge of qualitative research. Again, if you want to look up how to make personas, just Google them. We're no shortage of content on that out there. But what I want to share with you today is persona-led road mapping. But by the way, these things we try to remind everyone of them in our company. So this is a photo I took when we were in our San Francisco office. We sometimes stick our persona cards in the bathrooms, which is kind of creepy if you're the guy that's taking the photo. But let's just forget about that for a second and someone walks into the bathroom. But it's a good way to build that shared language on who are we building for and remind ourselves of that. So back to this persona-led road mapping approach. What we've tried to do sometimes at Atlassian is, rather than take this very quantitative spreadsheet approach, is for some scenarios where we're trying to improve satisfaction for a particular user, or we know a user is a champion, or it's a social product, and that user starts the cycle or is very important in that conversation cycle, is we'll put it in a table. And so we'll probably put this persona in what you might call a persona-led roadmap. In this table, I've done a very basic example here. We have the opportunities as one row and what we've achieved for that persona as the other row. And across the right-hand columns is each step of their user journey or their user flow. And as you write the different opportunities of problems you could solve for that persona, and you mark what you've done for each of the persona, another way to decide on what to build next is to identify the gaps. So in this example here, the red square obviously is a gap of, there's a step in the user's flow where we have not addressed any of their problems or addressed some of the opportunities we've had to make this experience better for our customers. So you might take a persona-led road mapping approach that way. Let me give you a more detailed example of how we do this at Atlassian. This is no smoke and mirrors here. We have a product in Confluence called Confluence Questions. It's a Q&A product. People can ask questions and get answers. In the first column here, you see our different personas. And on the right, you see the different journeys that they take throughout our product. So in this example, this is someone asking a question, the first table here. So this is the asker persona, if you like. We have the different phases that person goes through when they're asking a question. They go through this doubting phase, which is like, does this already exist? How do I do this? Then they go through the seeking phase where they're trying to find someone to help them. Then they go through the asking phase where they ask a question. Then there's this awkward wait period where they're waiting for someone to answer their question. You get the idea. They're the steps of that user's journey. And across the top, we write what are the opportunities for the different problems we could solve. And at the bottom, we identify the gaps. Which steps in the journey are just broken, as in we don't have a step there, or we could certainly improve it there. So that's certainly one way to do road mapping there. There's lots of other ways. I don't have time to go through them exhaustively. I guess what I want to encourage you here is to explore different ways. So in terms of taking a more data-informed or more balanced view when it comes to deciding on what to build next, I'd encourage you to do a few things here. if you're in a scenario where you need data to make a decision, why don't you spend some time with you on your teams and encourage them to fake the results before spending time integrating and waiting for the data? Not that that's ever a bad thing. You just might find that the data you might want to get instrumented is different, or really the questions that you're asking may result in a different outcome. So spend some time faking the results, then asking some questions with that data. Does it actually change anything? Would you do anything differently, or do you have more questions? Keep doing that process till you actually work out what you need to do. So value your questions over your data, I guess, is what I'm saying. Now, I talked about one way where you could take a different roadmap approach rather than these very spreadsheet-like approaches. They're not bad. The spreadsheet-like approaches work well, by the way. I didn't talk about this, but if you're doing more of you're comparing apples with apples, so you know that every item in that row is for that same user in that same scenario, then maybe that spreadsheet-like approach is probably good. But there's some scenarios where you're trying to improve user experience for a particular user in your product. In that scenario, you want to take a roadmap approach where you look at their holistic journey and you fill the gaps in the journey. There are a few other techniques we have created or I've created that might help your teams take different approaches to road mapping depending on the scenario they're in. So if you do want to check that out, that's a completely separate talk. bit.ly/building roadmaps. There are links there on the link, but you can check that out. I go into a bit more detail on the different kinds of road mapping techniques we have discovered over time, and we've tried to codify because they've been helpful for us rather than taking a one-size-fits-all all the time. All right, so we've talked about taking a more balanced view when it comes to goal setting. We've talked about the importance of qualitative questions asking and different road mapping techniques and different ways to help you decide what to build next. Now let's talk about this paradox of being too data-driven and being more data-informed when it comes to improving features. Now, I think a lot of our teams will be working on some sort of feature in our product, trying to make it better in some way. So how do we take more of a balanced view when it comes to this? How many times have you heard someone say this, or maybe you've said this yourself? I don't know. I've never said this. Only 5% of users who use this feature across our product. We should therefore remove it, right? Seems really logical, very easy to agree with straight away. You're like, oh, if it's low-used feature, of course we should remove low-used features. Why would we keep low-used features, right? Like that doesn't make any sense. I think we need to be aware again here, where we're being far too data-driven. In many things in building products, the question or the statement that's being said here is there's much more nuance here that we're missing rather than looking at this holistically. And so what I want to do with you is share with you 3 tips or 3 scenarios or 3 things to think about, if you like, when you're looking at a statement like this. We have a low-used feature. What do we do with it? How do we bring a more qualitative and balance to the conversation rather than statements like this? Let me go through 3 examples. So the first question I want you to be thinking about is, where is this feature in the user's mastery curve? Now, there is a lady by the name of Kathy Sierra, and she writes this book called, I think it's called Badass, Making Your Customers Awesome or something like that. Just look up Kathy Sierra. It's a really good book. But she talks about the importance of understanding your user's mastery curve. And she talks about how customers, you want to make your customers feel like champions, not your product feel like champions. You want to make them feel like they're mastering something. You know, a simple example is you can get a SLR camera and you can just click to take a photo and you're done. And as many of you probably know out there that have used cameras, the more you use the cameras, the more you discover, oh, I can do this and I can do that and I can change the aperture and I can have these different effects and I can blur the background a bit more. And you realize over time that there are certain features that are maybe intended to be discovered much later in the user's mastery curve than earlier in the user's mastery curve. So when someone tells you, where is this product in, where is this feature, when someone tells you this feature is only used by 5% of users, the first question I'd ask is that okay? What you really want to think about is cohorting your users by their maturity and then looking at feature usage in this example. For example, someone who's been using our product for 5 to 10 years, I would expect them to be more likely to want to learn how to use the keyboard shortcuts as an example, because they're becoming more of a master at it, as opposed to someone who's used the product in the first year, they may not want to do that. And in reality, that may not be designed for them. So an exercise for you to do as a team when you are assessing those features is plot those features on the product mastery curve. How much have they mastered the product over time? And then look at the user cohorts for those different users in different time points to understand, would we expect users that have been using this product for a while or that have done these activities to more likely to use this feature? So that's the first question to ask yourself when someone says, hey, we have a low used feature, what do we do with it? The second question to ask yourself is, are you actually measuring the feature in the right context? Often there might be different ways that a user decides to use your product. And so it's important, therefore, to measure the feature with that context in mind. Let me give you a simple example of this at Atlassian for us. So one of our products is called Trello. Some of you might know Trello. Trello is like sticky notes on a wall. It lets you do boards with columns with cards in them, etc. And it turns out Trello is a bit of a general purpose tool, as in you can use a board to represent anything, really. So let me give you some examples. You could use a board to track projects, so you can move your cards from to do and progress done. You could use your board to store ideas. So customers have columns that are like, hey, my wedding plans, and they have ideas for the wedding dress, ideas for the car, ideas for the reception, and they're using it a different way there. You might use a board to share things publicly. So a lot of our customers will use a Trello board to share a public roadmap with their customers. Or you might use a board to have a discussion and get feedback on a particular project or an item. The point is there are lots of ways you can use a board. So when we look at the features that we have within some of our boards, one of those features is assigning a task or an action to someone through a checklist. So you can create a checklist on a card, which are things to do. So when we look at this metric here, we could say, it looks like only, just making this number up, 7% of all our Trello users use checklists. Therefore, we should remove checklists. Is that an appropriate use of that statement, or have we missed the context here? Maybe a better way to frame it is understand the context. What was checklist designed for? Was designed for people that use Trello boards that are a bit more on the project's use case, as an example. So maybe a better way to frame that statement is, it looks like 40% of users who use Trello boards for projects use the checklist feature. So you're sort of cohorting the feature usage for its intent in the first place. So the second question to ask yourself is, are you measuring the feature in the right context when someone comes to you with, hey, we have a low used feature, we should remove it? Now, the last thing I think we should think about, and probably the most important thing, is what's the actual value of the feature? This classic 2x2 that you've probably seen all the time to help you decide, should we keep a feature or not? You've probably seen this before. High value, high frequency up the top right. Low value, low frequency at the bottom left. We should remove all the features in the bottom left and keep things on the top right. Very similar to the road mapping technique, by the way, that we use. And what do we do with the other two quadrants? Again, no one can really tell you, but something like that. It's not really that simple. How do you decide the value of a feature? Is frequency equal usage? Let me give you an example here. How often do you use the airbags in your car? Probably never. What's the value of having airbags in your car? Probably really high. How often do you use the fire extinguisher in a public place? Probably never. What's the value? Really high. I wonder why we stop thinking about that when it comes to software sometimes. Just to give you a humorous example, we had one of our hackathons at Atlassian where it's called Ship It. And one of the engineers during Ship It decided, bless his soul, he had really good intent here. This engineer decided to remove some of our low used features. Jira's got so much stuff, I'm going to remove a bunch of features. Great, awesome, go for it, mate. So he went and ran a bunch of queries, found some of our lowest used features. And in his hackathon, and he was presenting at the end, he's like, I removed these features. One of the features he removed was the ability to deactivate a user from Jira. So when someone leaves your company, an IT administrator probably needs to revoke access to their system. So he realized that was a fairly low-used feature and we should remove it. And I was like, whoa, hang on a sec, buddy. When someone leaves a company, how else does an administrator turn them off? That is a low-used feature, but that's okay that it's low-used and it's high value. So it caused me to think about hang on a second, how do we actually measure value? And a large part of this is having this conversation with the team, because I think a huge misconception in our industry is frequency of use equals value. Frequency of use equals value. We need to throw this throw this in the rubbish bin. We need to burn it. Actually, there's been a lot of dark patterns created as a result of this. A lot of people that will do pop-ups and things in your faces because people clicked on it, therefore it must be valuable. At the end of the day, how do you work out a value of a feature? Have a conversation with your customer. Have a conversation, understand why they use it. Understand what they did before they used it. Maybe I've seen some companies take the feature away or hide it and see who screams, how important is it to them? And then have a discussion with them about it. I mean, it's a bit of an extreme example, but it is a way to actually understand the value. You really need to have this conversation with your customers to understand how much time is it saving them, all that kind of stuff. The only way I have found to truly understand the value of a feature is not through one of these frameworks, is to talk to customers and build that shared brain with your team. If you don't have that and purely are looking at the data, you're going to send your team around in circles. So hopefully, just to recap, how do we bring a more balanced approach when it comes to improving the features that we already have in our products? 3 questions to think about when someone tells you, hey, we have a low-used feature, we should remove it, or when you yourself are spending time looking at data. Where is this feature in the user's mastery curve? Is it okay for it to be low use for early adopter customers, or would we expect this feature to be used when a customer uses another set of features? So there's a certain set of sequencing we expect them to do. So the second thing is make sure that you're measuring the feature in the right context. Are you measuring the feature for the usage or the cohort that it was intended for? And make sure you're doing that. And the third thing is understand the true value of the feature before you want to make a decision for it. And frequency of use is far often not the best way to determine value. It could just be a sign of a really bad user experience design because you have to click 5 times to do the thing that you wanted to do. So move away from your data consoles every now and then. Have a conversation with your customer to truly understand the value. And do that not with yourself, but with your whole team, because the more you can empower your team with this balanced view of using the data to make informed decisions and bringing in light the customer qualitative context, then I think the better you can build products. So I hope I've given you some practical tips in how to build more balance to the conversation of being a little bit too data-driven, and hopefully shifting your mindsets to using data as a piece of input to inform you into what your teams do. And I've done this through 3 different areas that a lot of our product teams spend time on. When it comes to goal setting, we looked at the importance of giving teams a focus on a problem and a heart for the problem over being slightly too laser focused on a metric. Because, if you can do that and you're a little bit tunnel visioned, then chances are you're probably going to miss something here. And I gave you the example of what happened in Confluence for us. So define those guardrail metrics as part of your definition of success, not just focused on a single measure. And how do you make sure what those guardrails are? If you don't have North Star alignment on your product vision, what you think your product will be, how the world will be better, and what you're trying to achieve, then it's going to be very hard to do all of this. And that needs to happen as a conversation as a team to align on what the product's North Star is, so that your team can create the right guardrail metrics, and then your team can focus on the right problems. Second thing we talked about is the importance of bringing balance to the conversation when you're deciding on what to build next. Whether it be you're trying to analyze a feature and make a decision, and you hit the scenario where you don't have any data, fake the results before spending lots of time implementing it if you can, and have a conversation next. You're either going to get a low, a medium, or a high number. What are the questions you have? Are you actually going to take any action, or do you have more questions? Chances are you have more questions. Focus on those questions and refine them, and then work out the best plan of attack. And then we talked about road mapping when you're trying to decide what next. It is very easy for us to fall on our spreadsheet-driven roadmaps. Chances are those things work well. Again, I'm not making fun of them. If you're truly comparing apples with apples for a specific user in a specific scenario, far too often I've seen teams lay their first column as a bunch of different features for different users and a different set of scale metrics, and it just doesn't make sense. So understand the scenario that your product is in. Are you optimizing to improve customer satisfaction for one particular user? If you are, consider using a persona-driven roadmap rather than one of those prioritization frameworks that are more numbers focused. Again, I didn't go through a comprehensive set of roadmap techniques, but check out bit.ly/building roadmaps if you would love to learn more about different techniques that are, again, just build your toolbox of different scenarios of when to help you decide what to build next. The last thing we just talked about is using data to help you improve your features and how really you can bring balance to the conversation there. I gave you 3 questions to ask you or your teams as you look at this low used features statement. You want to make an assessment of a value of something. Understand where that feature is in the user's product mastery curve. It may be okay that it's low used for certain cohorts of users. Second thing is make sure you're measuring it in the right context. Are you sure you've measured it for the types of users that are eligible to use this feature? And lastly, understand the value over the usage. Usage does not equate to value. And the only way you're going to understand the value is to talk to people to better understand what they're getting out of it and how much this particular functionality has made their world better. So hopefully I've given you 3 key areas for you and your teams to think about in how to bring balance to this conversation of being a little bit too data-driven and rather going more on the data-informed side. I would love to continue this conversation with you. So if you've got some time, head over to Slack and let's keep chatting about it.